The firelight cast dancing shadows across the stone walls of the ancient hall, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Selene stood before the massive hearth, her fur-lined cloak draped across her shoulders, the ornate necklace at her throat catching the flickering light. Behind her she could feel his presence like heat from the flames themselves. Kael, the Alpha, the one man in all the realm she should fear, yet the only one who made her feel truly seen. They said wolves don't weep. They said Lycans were creatures of pure instinct, of primal power and unbreakable will. They said the Alpha King especially was more beast than man, ruling his pack with strength that brooked no weakness, no softness, no tears. But Selene had learned that what they said was rarely the whole truth. She had come to the Lycan territories 6 months ago, not by choice, but by necessity. Her village had been destroyed in the wars between the human kingdoms, caught in the crossfire of ambitions that cared nothing for the innocent. She'd fled north, into the wild mountains where humans feared to tread, where the old magic still thrummed beneath the earth and creatures of legend made their homes. She should have died in those mountains, would have if Kael's hunting party hadn't found her collapsed in the snow, half frozen and delirious with fever. She remembered very little of that first week. Fragments of warmth, of voices speaking in a language that sounded like wind through winter trees, of gentle hands tending her wounds. When she'd finally woken fully, she'd found herself in a chamber more beautiful than anything she'd known in her human life. The Lycans had taken her in, though she didn't understand why. Their healer, an ancient woman named Mora with silver-streaked hair and eyes that saw too much, had explained that their Alpha had commanded it. That Kael himself had carried Selene through the snow to their stronghold, had stayed by her bedside through the worst of the fever, had refused to let her slip away into death. Why would he do that? Selene had asked, bewildered. He doesn't know me. Mora had smiled, a knowing expression that made Selene's heart skip. The Alpha knows what he needs to know. Trust in that child. In the months that followed, Selene had learned the ways of the Lycan pack. She'd discovered they were nothing like the monsters from human stories. They were a people, a family bound by ties deeper than blood. They laughed and quarreled, celebrated and mourned. They had customs and traditions that stretched back thousands of years. And yes, they could transform into massive wolves, creatures of terrible beauty and power. But that was only one part of who they were. She'd also learned about Kael. The other Lycans spoke of him with reverence and love. He'd become Alpha young, they said, after his father fell in battle against the dark things that sometimes crept down from the furthest mountains. Kael had been barely more than a boy, but he'd taken up the mantle of leadership without hesitation. In the 30 years since, he'd made their pack strong, prosperous, safe. But there was a sadness in him. They whispered when they thought Selene couldn't hear. A loneliness that even the love of his pack couldn't quite fill. Selene had seen it herself. She'd watched Kael in unguarded moments when he stood alone on the battlements looking out at his lands, his expression distant and haunted. She'd noticed how he held himself apart even in the midst of celebration, as if some invisible wall separated him from the joy around him. She'd observed the careful control he maintained over every word, every gesture, every emotion. It was exhausting just to witness. She couldn't imagine what it cost him to live that way. "You're thinking too loudly," Kael said now, his voice a low rumble that she felt in her bones. "I can hear your thoughts spinning from here." Selene turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, backlit by torches from the corridor beyond. He wore furs and leather like always, practical clothing that did nothing to diminish his presence. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his eyes gleamed with that inner light all Lycans possessed. He was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful, dangerous and untamed and absolutely vital. "I was thinking about sadness," Selene said honestly. She'd learned early that Kael valued truth above all else, about the weight of things we carry alone. Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to name. He crossed the room with the fluid grace of a predator, stopping a few feet away from her. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, far enough that propriety was maintained. "Is this about your village again?" he asked gently. "Mora says you've been having the dreams more frequently." Selene shook her head. "No, this is about you." Kael went very still. In any other man, it might have seemed like simple surprise. But Selene had learned to read the subtle signs of Lycan emotion. The tension in his shoulders. The way his breathing changed. the slight widening of his eyes before he schooled his expression back to neutrality. Me? He said carefully. You carry so much, Selene continued. The safety of your pack, the responsibility of leadership, the burden of always being strong, always being in control. When do you get to rest, Kael? When do you get to just be? That's not how it works for an alpha, he replied. His voice had taken on that formal tone he used when uncomfortable. My people depend on me. I can't afford weakness. Is feeling things weakness? Selene challenged. She took a step closer, emboldened by months of friendship, by the connection that had grown between them in quiet conversations and shared silences. Is honesty weakness? Is letting someone see the real you, not just the mask you wear, somehow a failure? Kael's jaw tightened. For a moment, Selene thought she'd pushed too far, crossed some invisible line. Then he turned away, moving to stand before the fire. The flames painted his profile in sharp relief. You don't understand, he said quietly. When you're an alpha, your emotions affect everyone. If I'm angry, the pack feels it. If I'm afraid, it spreads like poison through our bonds. I learned young to keep everything locked down, controlled. It's not about strength or weakness. It's about protecting the people I love from the storm inside me. Selene's heart ached at the raw honesty in his words. She moved to stand beside him, close enough now that their shoulders almost touched. That sounds incredibly lonely. It is what it is. But it doesn't have to be, she said softly. You saved my life, Kael. You brought me into your home, your pack. You gave me a place to belong when I had nothing. Do you want to know why I think you did that? He didn't answer, but she felt him listening with every fiber of his being. I think you recognized something in me, the same thing I see in you. We're both survivors of loss, both carrying grief we don't know how to put down, both pretending to be stronger than we feel. She took a breath. But here's what I've learned these past months. Sharing the burden doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, or, well, as human as a Lycan can be. Kael made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You're very wise for someone so young. I'm 26, Selene protested. That's not that young. I'm 73, Kael countered. Trust me, you're young. Now Selene did laugh. Age was such a strange thing among the Lycans. They lived centuries, aging so slowly that decades passed like seasons. Kael looked perhaps 30 in human years, in the absolute prime of life. It was disorienting sometimes to remember the years he carried. Age doesn't matter, she said. Loneliness is loneliness, whether you've lived 20 years or 200. Kael finally turned to look at her fully. In his eyes she saw walls crumbling, defenses falling away. Why do you care? He asked, and there was genuine confusion in the question. Why does it matter to you if I'm lonely? Because I'm falling in love with you, Selene thought. Because every day I spend in your presence makes it harder to imagine a life without you in it. Because when you smile, truly smile without that careful control, I feel like I'm seeing the sunrise for the first time. But she wasn't ready to say those words aloud. Not yet. So instead, she said, because you matter, Kael. Because you deserve to be more than just an alpha. You deserve to be a person too. Something broke in him then. She watched it happen. Saw the moment when all that iron control finally cracked. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the strength in those fingers. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she realized with shock that her face was wet. She was crying, tears she hadn't known she was shedding. Selene. He whispered her name like a prayer, like a confession. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago. Then tell me, she breathed. You're my mate, Kael said. From the moment I caught your scent in the snow, every instinct in me screamed that you were mine. That's why I couldn't let you die. Why I brought you here. Why I've kept you close even though I knew I should send you back to the human lands. The mate bond doesn't care about species or logic. It just is. Selene's breath caught. She'd heard whispers about mate bonds, about the sacred connection that sometimes formed between Lycans. But she'd never imagined, never thought, I'm human, she said, as if he might have forgotten. I know, Kael replied. And I'm a Lycan Alpha who can't control himself around you. Who wants to mark you, claim you, keep you by my side forever. It's selfish. It's dangerous. It's asking you to give up the chance at a normal human life. But I can't pretend anymore, Selene. I can't keep lying to myself that I'm noble enough to let you go. Joy and fear warred in Selene's chest. This was huge, terrifying, life-altering. And yet, when she looked into Kael's eyes, She saw everything she'd been searching for without knowing it. Home, safety, love, a place where she could be wholly herself. What if I don't want to be let go? She asked. What if I want to stay? What if I've been falling for you too these past months and was just too scared to admit it? Hope flared in Kael's expression, bright and fierce. Then I would spend every day of our lives making sure you never regretted choosing me. Selene reached up, covering his hand with her own where it still cupped her face. Wolves don't weep, she said softly. That's what they say. But you know what I think? I think wolves don't weep because they don't have to. Because when you find your mate, when you find the person who sees all of you and loves you anyway, the sadness transforms into something else, something beautiful. Kael leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. And there, in the firelight, with the weight of months of loneliness finally lifting, he did something no one had seen him do in decades. He smiled. Not the careful, controlled smile of an Alpha King, but the genuine, unguarded smile of a man who'd found his home in another person. Stay with me, he whispered, not as a guest or a refugee. Stay as my mate, my equal, my partner. Yes, Selene answered, and the word felt like a beginning and an ending all at once. Outside, snow began to fall on the mountain stronghold, covering everything in quiet white. Inside the great hall, two souls found each other across the divide of species and circumstance. There would be challenges ahead, questions to answer, adjustments to make. But for now, there was only this. A human woman and a Lycan king choosing love over fear, connection over isolation. Wolves don't weep, the old saying went. But perhaps with the right person beside them, they simply didn't need to anymore.